All right, YouTube. Once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart here for the podcast, talking Auburn football real quick. We're entertaining the thought of the 2022 Auburn football team actually winning the SEC championship, and even more unlikely, possibly going to the college football playoff. Now, that's way out of bounds considering all that has happened. Here's the announcement. All right, guys, Kennard Vernon Stewart here for the podcast. Go ahead and like the video, comment, and subscribe to Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn. And as always, it's great to be an Auburn Tiger, War Eagle. Okay, so just the other day, I stumbled across an article, which I didn't read, by the way. But the article's title was Ways That Auburn Could Win the SEC Championship in 2022. That title really sparked my curiosity, and I started to think about it a little bit and really started to think about the historical nature of Auburn's success when they're successful at a high level. And there are a couple of things that I came across. Number one is Auburn just doesn't have a high level of predictability. Auburn is not a team, I don't care what type of fan you are and how you try to analyze and try to predict what Auburn's outcome is going to be in any season. No honest Auburn fan within themselves can say, okay, going into this season, I knew that Auburn would win, at least the SEC championship. And we're going to explain that in a few seconds. Also, Auburn tends to, over the years, you look at it. You all are kind of, bouncing up and down in your chairs about the recruiting classes and the level of talent that Auburn has been able to attain here over the last few years. And you're thinking there's no way LSU is recruiting at a high level. Georgia's recruiting at an insanely high level. Alabama's continuing to plateau at the highest level possible. All of these teams are putting guys in the NFL at a high level. At this point, there's no way that Auburn can win. Hell, there's no way based on this hypothesis that Auburn could even win the SEC West. And let's talk about this for a second. LSU, Georgia, and Alabama. Well, actually, Georgia's in the SEC East, so let's just kind of kick them out. The only reason why we talk about Georgia is because that's a team that Auburn has to play every year. They have an agreement to where this is their rival from the SEC East. They play them every year. The strange case scenario was until a couple of years ago, I think it might have even been last year. A couple of years ago, Auburn had the unique luxury, and I say that very sarcastically, Auburn had the unique luxury of facing Georgia, who is probably usually a top 10 team, sandwiched by an FCS team. And then a couple of weeks later, 3 weeks later, sandwiched in between the FCS team, Auburn then has to turn around and play Alabama. Alabama usually a football team that Auburn only stands in the way of either a one loss going into the SEC championship or a loss to Auburn eliminates their chances altogether. And there have been several occasions where Auburn has actually been successful in ruining Alabama's chances to go to the next level. Now, at one point, let's say back in 2017, Auburn did beat Alabama by double digits, eliminating them from the SEC championship game. Auburn subsequently goes to the SEC championship game in Alabama's place. Alabama sits at the house. Georgia beats Auburn. Somehow, some kind of way, Alabama doesn't win the SEC West, doesn't participate in the SEC championship game, but winds up in the college football playoffs and ironically wins the game. I thought that was pretty interesting. Georgia deserved it. 2017, they deserved it. They had the loss against Auburn. They took that under the chin. They subsequently turned around and beat Auburn in the SEC championship game. Then they had this really crazy comeback from behind win against Oklahoma, because it looked like Oklahoma was going to run them out of the Rose Bowl for sure. But Georgia faces Alabama in the national championship game. Everything is going right for Georgia. Everything's going wrong for Alabama. Nick Saban makes the quarterback change to Tua Tagovailoa, and the rest is history. Georgia actually wins that game in overtime. Devontae Smith with the long touchdown pass. Blown coverage for sure. Touchdown Alabama. Georgia does not win the national championship game that year. There have been plenty of times that Auburn has been in position in unlikely circumstances to win to have these types of successes. All right, so I'm going to take you all back. Let's do the time machine thing. I'm going to take you guys all the way back to 1990. Auburn goes 5-5. 1991, Auburn goes 5-6-1. 2 consecutive 5-win seasons for Auburn. Coming into the 1992 season, I mean, no one could have thought about the events that would unfold in that year. So Auburn casually comes into the 1992 season in the midst of Pat Dye leaving the program as a coach. He's still kind of stuck around because of probation issues. Auburn wasn't eligible for the national championship or SEC championship that year. And, I mean, there was really no buzz surrounding this particular team. Auburn, however, in a very strange, very unlikely fashion, wins all of the football games that year. Auburn, with eligibility, assuming they win their bowl game that year, of course, the SEC championship game wasn't, I don't think it was in fruition at that point yet. But Auburn wins that, goes undefeated that year. And now you have a situation where Auburn had consecutive all but losing seasons, and they all but win the national championship. Where does this stuff come from? And that was the intrigue that I had about this article. With all the bullshit that's going on with Brian Harsin and his staff over the offseason, not being overly successful in the transfer portal, where is this going to come from? Okay, I'll take you a little bit further up the timeline. Let's go back to 2003. Auburn begins the season with 2 of the best linebackers in recent Auburn history outside of Takeo Spikes in Dontarius Thomas and Carlos Dansby. Actually, they were featured on the ESPN News as ESPN News thought that Auburn would be one of the better teams in the country. Started out, I think, number 6, pretty high. A really marquee game, home game actually. I was around during that time. It was a beautiful scene. It was hot as hell out there though. Beautiful scene. 2003, first game of the year. Auburn taking on University of Southern California, a team that they lost to the year prior. Now let's go back to 2003. Auburn didn't score a touchdown the first 2 games. They struggled to score, even against Georgia Tech, losing in Atlanta 17-3, going on to a 9-4 season with a win over Wisconsin in the Music City Bowl. So let's go back to 2004. Well, let's go forward to 2004. Auburn loses Carlos Dansby and Dontarius Thomas, 2 huge leaders on the defensive team. Now on board is Travis Williams and his linebacker crew, and a very inexperienced cornerback out of Lochapoka High School. But then you still had Carlos Rogers on the other side. You had a team that, I mean, no one really expected much. Of course, you still had Jason Campbell, Devin Aroma-Shadu, Ben Obamanu as wide receivers. They were great. I thought they were pretty good. You also had the tandem at running back in Carnell Williams and Ronnie Brown. So that would tell you that, okay, this may be a decent season for the Tigers. They came out kind of dry with the win over University of Louisiana Monroe. But things slowly started to develop. I'm going to tell you the game that many start, because Auburn always has these games, because I'm going to talk about this later on in the video with other seasons that have been similar to this. There's always that one game that starts to make you, as an Auburn fan or Auburn supporter, or just just a fan of college football, you look at Auburn, there's always that one defining game that lets you know, well, shit, maybe these guys might be on to something. Hurricane Ivan had just come through, ripped through the state of Alabama. A lot of folks didn't even think this game between Auburn and LSU would be played. Nick Saban, then the head coach for LSU, my goodness, they brought a good team into Auburn. Battling. Auburn scores with Courtney Taylor. I mean, I think it was even a 4th down conversion. Jason Campbell, a beautiful pass to Courtney Taylor. The score is now 9-9. Now, this is where all that destiny stuff comes in when you talk about Auburn. Auburn gets set up for the extra point. Auburn misses the extra point. But guess what? Everyone who was watching that game from home saw that little yellow flag sign on the CBS part of the icon. And there was a penalty against LSU for basically roughing the center. He dove and landed on top of the center. Gives Auburn a second chance at the extra point. Auburn wins the game 10-9. They go on to not only win the rest of the season's game, they win the SEC championship game. Get snubbed, though, out of the national championship game, but goes undefeated, beating Virginia Tech. Very unlikely scenario, right? So let's keep going. Let's keep this thing going. 2009, Auburn really, I mean, you got Gene Chizik and his own board. And man, look, I mean, they really had an entertaining season that year. They didn't win. I think they were like 7-6 or something crazy like that. They beat Northwestern in a real strange fashion in the bowl game. And, okay, great. Another kind of subpar Auburn season. Okay, so 2010 comes around, and I wasn't a follower of recruiting at that time. The strange thing about it was I did go to the A-Day game, but I was just kind of bullshitting around. I didn't know what was going on out there. Didn't even know that Cam Newton was on the field. To be fair, I wasn't paying attention. Tailgating with my frat brothers, and then kind of stumbled into the A-Day game. I might have stayed in the A-Day game about 15, 20 minutes because as a student at Auburn, I just really didn't follow the A-Day game like that. I go there and then, just kind of roll out. And by then I had graduated, of course, but I happened to be in town for A-Day game, so I just kind of rolled through. But there was nothing that I saw or any buzz that I kind of caught a hold of that would lead me to believe that Auburn would be any more than a 8-5, maybe 9-4 team at best, considering what happened last year and then subsequent year. Cam Newton, yeah, whatever. But then we go back to this whole destiny thing as it relates to Auburn. Okay, so Auburn wins outright the first game. Then Clemson comes to town. And a lot of strange things happen. Thought Auburn was going to lose that game. A lot of miracles started to happen. The miracles started to pile up for the Tigers. South Carolina came into town. Auburn's down by a pretty nice amount. They come back to win the freaking football game. Crazy stuff, right? The game, in my opinion, of the 2010 year that made me believe that Auburn was on to something, this was the last game that I actually attended in person. I was tired after it was so much score, and I was actually tired after the game. Auburn took on Arkansas. I thought, okay, this is going to be the one where Auburn, plus I'm bringing bad luck because I haven't been to a game all year, so here I am. But man, the destiny continued. I mean, crazy stuff. Josh Bynes, of all people, had 2 interceptions in that game, one that sealed the deal. After that game, Auburn continued to get better, continued to believe, and that's another thing I'm going to talk about in this video is that belief. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. The SEC championship is won by Auburn in 2010, and they win the national championship. Now, the last season that I'm going to talk about, where Auburn had nobody had any idea going into the season that no fan even, national championship or SEC championship wasn't even on the radar. Auburn coming off the worst season probably in school history, didn't win a single SEC game in 2012. Nobody knew what was going on. Gus Malzahn, who was the offensive coordinator on the national championship team, comes back as the head coach. And nobody saw this coming. Nick Marshall's quarterback. The destiny thing starts to happen again. Auburn had a pretty bad game, I think, in the first half against LSU, but that game kind of sort of gave them, you know what? We're not that bad. But the game of this season that really told the story of Auburn's potentiality, Auburn took a trip down to College Station in 2013, taking on Texas A&M. Now, here's the skinny on this game. The prior year, 2012, Texas A&M in their inaugural year in the SEC comes into Jordan-Hare Stadium. I didn't watch the game. I saw the highlights on ESPN that night. I saw the score, and I was like, holy shit. Texas A&M beat. I had never seen any team. There have been some national championship teams that have come through Auburn at Jordan-Hare Stadium, and Auburn fought them nail and tooth. But Texas A&M, with Johnny Manziel, who eventually won the Heisman Trophy, they murdered Auburn, 63-21. Fast forward to 2013, Auburn has to take the trip down to College Station, and this began the whole crazy concept of the newly founded SEC West rivalry between Texas A&M and Auburn, which I will put this on paper, one of my favorite games to watch. Now, I love that game. I don't know why, but I love that game. But either way, Auburn goes down to College Station after being humiliated at home by Texas A&M, 63-21. And somehow, Auburn has been relatively successful up to this point. Texas A&M comes into the game ranked number 7th in the country. Auburn comes in ranked number 24. So you got a ranked game, CBS. Of course, you got not Brad Nessler. You have the announcers from CBS. I can't think of their names right now for some reason. But either way, you have them on the scene. You have this big SEC West game. You have Nick Marshall. And this was the game where Nick Marshall solidified himself, in my opinion, as a really viable dual threat quarterback. Now, the beginning of the game would dictate, okay, this thing is about to go pretty much like last year went, maybe not quite as bad. Maybe we're talking about a 45-21 game, something like that. But no, Auburn's defense started to make some plays, got an interception early in the game down in the red zone. Auburn's starting to believe. Nick Marshall's making some really good plays. Nick Marshall's done ran a touchdown in, So next thing you know, you got a fist and tooth battle. Battling. Final drive, Auburn in the lead, and looks like Johnny Manziel is going to provide some heroics, and, the game goes just about how we figured it would, maybe a little closer than it, was supposed to be. But as predicted, Texas A&M should win the game. Oh, no. Auburn's defense stood up in an epic fashion, and D. Ford makes the sack on Johnny Manziel, seals the deal. That was the defining game of that season. Auburn goes on into the Iron Bowl. Alabama they stand in each other's way to the SEC championship and possibly a national championship. And then you have the kick six, that destiny stuff. Again, Auburn goes to the SEC championship. That game was like a basketball game. Auburn beats Missouri 59-42. And then, of course, the disappointing loss to Florida State. Now, I took you down this rabbit hole just to say this. One, we can't predict what Auburn is going to do in any given year, let alone this one. Number two, Auburn has this thing about them called destiny. When it's for Auburn, I'm telling you, that ball bounces in crazy ways for Auburn. And then three, at a certain point with any team, and this is any level in life, when you start to win, because this happened to me when my senior year of high school, we weren't that good to begin with, but we started to win. Winning does something real strange to your psyche. Winning starts to make you believe shit that you normally wouldn't believe. It'll have you thinking that you're a 1A team and you can beat a 5A team in football. It'll have you believing shit like that. Same thing happened to Auburn. They started to believe that those wins started to pile up, and they started to believe in each other. And they started to believe, who says that this team in 22 can't do that? I'm not saying they will, because everything on paper says absolutely not. But what I will tell you is that if anybody can do it, if any team can do it, historically speaking, Auburn can. Hey guys, let me know what you think about this video. Go ahead and become a member of Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn. I just wanted to give you a little entertainment for today. We're not saying either way whether Auburn will win the SEC championship or will they not. But we are saying history dictates that crazy shit has happened at Auburn, and this year could be no different. Like this video, comment, and subscribe to Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn. And as always, it's great to be an Auburn Tiger. War Eagle.